This is the Overton Pod. Hello, Kanthan.
Hello, John. You know, I was actually tempted to do the thing that our news teams did up in Washington, which is to screech hysterically.
Halala.
Halala.
We can halala the viewers and listeners to the show.
Yes.
Yes, indeed, very, very embarrassing having journalists. And in fairness, a respected journalist, Annika Larson is a decent journalist. She's done.
Oh, was that
certainly
Annika
less-
Larson?
Yeah.
My goodness, yeah.
Yeah, certainly less to
It sounded
embarrass
like
herself.
a screeching harridan. I mean, really.
Much less to embarrass herself than a lot of our other journalists. Do me a favor, just move that mic a little bit closer to your mouth. So great, thank you. Washington, wow. Surely that's got to be topic of discussion.
Yeah. Do we want to start by talking about Washington?
I think let's leave it a little bit and let's get into whatever it is that's catching your fancy at the moment. And then we'll spend the rest of the show talking about.
I think one of the
of
things
that.
that I want to do was to just very quickly look in terms of what went down with the budget speech, simply because we've had all this excitement coming from across the pond. And I think the devil is in the detail around the budget.
Which, just to say, should have been sorted and done long ago. But because our politicians cannot reduce spending, refuse to, and then we had the whole debacle with the DA and the ANC, obviously, and then Action SA being, well, is there another word than retarded? We now sit in a position in May, not really having a budget.
Well, now we've actually got bills that are mapping out the framework around how we're going to be spending money over the next year. And of course, the single biggest point of irritation is the fact that we need to be borrowing yet again.
Yeah,
Which,
and then paying interest on those loans.
Correct.
And that interest is slowly creeping up.
So, to remind people that at the point of the Mandela era, the single biggest item of expenditure on the national budget was interest payable on debt. And right now we are fast getting to that point. It is currently the second biggest item on the budget. And remember that most of the money that we are spending through that debt is going into social grants.
Yeah.
So we are borrowing to give money away, which is not having any type of fiscal stimulus because, correspondingly, while we are doing that stuff, it's effectively treated by the markets as the same way as printing money, and that means that overall,
it's inflationary.
Yeah, it's inflationary. Yes, and that's exactly what happens.
It's also logically something that's unsustainable because what will happen is you'll keep borrowing to give away, meaning you never get any value in return for that money.
Correct. Yes.
Which means you'll continue to borrow, and at some point, the people lending you are going to say no more.
Well, in terms of the ratings agencies, that's been the case for a while. But, clearly we haven't yet run out of people that we can extort money from in other forms. So, to that point, the increase in the fuel levy to compensate for the VAT increase that did not go through is an immediate way in which everyone who actually contributes to building the economy gets penalized so that you can continue buying votes in rural areas through making use of these handouts in the form of social grants and so forth. But look, I don't want to make it all about the kind of doom and gloom stuff around it. So just
go into the...
So just a couple of things that I noticed in terms of the two bills, which is the appropriations bill and the division of revenue bill. And the two things that kind of struck me in both of them that was a bit of a departure from previous years was this enforcement of strict oversight on spending. Okay, so there's a very structured reporting framework that now has to go through to the parliamentary committees, which is a departure from previous years because, the minister had significant leeway in terms of being able to do that.
Override things.
Yeah. So, well, not override, just simply not report. Yeah. The stuff, money could be dispensed without any oversight. And
I'm just saying there was no process. Essentially.
So we've now got a start in terms of this process. There's a significant uptick in terms of health and education spending, but nowhere at the levels needed to pay for an NHI. So I'm working on the assumption that even though they're committed to this idea, they don't have a practical way of actually finding any cash in order to fund this abomination. Mm-hmm. And until such time as the ANC is once again going to be in a position to call the shots around the budget, which frankly is only going to happen if they go into partnership with MK.
I'm not convinced, by the way, that MK would support NHI.
Neither am I. But
we don't know, so put that on the back burner.
Yeah, but we put it on the back. But the takeaway is that right now, NHI is not going to take off.
The only thing I would say to that is that I know some of the people involved in NHI, some at a distance and some relatively personally. None of them I would call my friends, but I've come across these people in my time around the health space, of course, as a journalist. And what I will say about these people is that some of them are true believers. In other words, when you say to them there's no money for NHI, they don't believe that. And you can say, and you can show them the documents. You can say, here's the budget. It will cost X amount to fund NHI and to do this. And in terms of just following the act that's been passed into law, and they will still say there is, because what they believe fundamentally is that all of the costs are imaginary. Okay, so, and Aaron Motsoaledi has said this many, many times. Private healthcare is too expensive. Private healthcare costs too much. These kinds of statements. As if people just suck figures out of their thumbs. As if you take a patient with a broken bone into the hospital, through the entire process, to theatre, fix their broken bone, out to a ward, look after them, rehabilitate them, and send them back out into the world, as if that process can be made much, much cheaper. They ignore the fact that when you actually look at input costs in public healthcare, they often exceed the costs in private healthcare.
For sure.
But I will just say that you cannot reason with ideologues.
Correct.
Because these people genuinely believe NHI can be done with basically not a cent more. They think if they loot what is being spent in private, they can provide the healthcare that gets given to roughly 12 million people in the private sector. I'm talking tertiary healthcare. Remember, GPs, private healthcare is 80% of this country. But in terms of hospital healthcare, they truly believe if they just loot the private healthcare system, it can 12 million can suddenly be spread over 60 million, and you will get the equal amount of care. It's just that they aren't in charge, Kanthan, and they aren't controlling it.
Well, you see, the big issue that they have is how to be able to loot that private healthcare without at the same time shooting themselves in the foot, because all of them happen to be on that very same private healthcare.
Yes, in fact, I know for a fact that one of the architects was in a private hospital last year for something, and kept it on the very down low. And when questioned about it by a journalist, actually, sort of said, off record and all this kind of stuff to try and cover it up as much as possible. So, yeah.
Yeah, but so, drilling back into the budget stuff, and again, but you realize that these guys actually don't have a clue in terms of how to map out their projections. So if you look in terms of our GDP, 2023 fiscal, we were sitting at 0.7% GDP growth. 2024, we went backwards, which to 0.6. The projection that the finance minister is now making is that we're going to get 1.4% of GDP growth in the year ahead, which, frankly, I think that the minister in this particular case is smoking his socks, or certainly the DG in the Treasury, who would have been responsible for drawing up these budgets.
Can I ask you, because you study these things quite closely, and I couldn't put a number to it. I'm interested if you can. It strikes me that a country like us should have GDP growths between 5 and 10% per annum.
Correct.
The reason I say that is because unlike developed countries, and it's not only about the country in and of itself, it's about the people in that country. Unlike in developed countries, the majority of people have moved into the middle class. That's where they'll stay their entire lives at some higher or lower level of that. And those people have then bought houses, washing machines, fridges, cars, etc., and they've become involved in the economy and in various jobs servicing that, right? And so for a developed country to grow their GDP, they either have to invent a new industry or a product that sort of blows through the roof, which seldom happens. I'm sure you can see the GDP of somewhere like Finland increasing massively in the early 2000s thanks to Nokia, as an example. But generally, it's hard to do that. In our case, there's so much potential growth to be moving that lower class into the middle class, for them all to be buying product. That product has to be supplied. It has to be serviced. Those people have to have jobs and enter industry. And so our GDP growth, what do you suppose it could be if we sort of unleash the horses?
So I think as a very immediate point, if you look in terms of the cost of implementing broad-based black economic empowerment, that in itself is probably shaving 2 percentage points off our GDP.
Per annum.
Per annum. Okay. So if you were to scrap broad-based black economic empowerment, just the fact that businesses will no longer have the regulatory burden of needing to implement all of those which basically holds back your ability to develop your business to its fullest capacity.
Yeah.
So factor in 2 percentage points from there. If we are to bring in Starlink, which is then going to be able to unlock the ability of the rural areas to then start developing ecosystems that are actually going to work to their advantage, I think you can probably look at least another 2 percentage points that can be shaved off immediately as a direct result of that. So that immediately, just those two things. Now, consider as well that you have the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the Labor Relations Act, and minimum wage. Now, minimum wage is the single biggest tax on the economy, because what it does is it is price fixing for labor, effectively, in a country where we have a surplus of labor. And instead of allowing the market to determine the price of that labor, we are putting price fixing on it. And it's this perfectly evil scenario that we have, where we say it's perfectly okay for the state to insist that people live on a grant of 350 Rand a month.
Yeah.
But it is unacceptable for the same person to work for 1,000 Rand a month. And that's really the choice that we have. So again, if you removed all of those, so consider, for example, in terms of the Labor Relations Act.
Yeah.
If right now, as an employer, if I'm hiring a person and the person doesn't shape up, and within the course of a year, I get rid of that employer, come hell or high water, no matter how well structured my contract is, that person is going to take me to the CCMA.
Correct.
And that's a process that then ties up the person's immediate line manager, the human resources officer, all of which are costs associated with it. And as a result, you always end up needing to pay out that person to make the problem go away. So factor in another couple of percentage points there in terms of the fact that we don't have flexibility in terms of hiring and firing. So if we can just get those basics correct, then immediately we fix the economy. And it really is as straightforward as that. As it is right now, we've got the minister projecting 1.4% for next year, 1.6% the next year, and 1.8% the next year. And none of this actually helps us because our population growth rate is more than 2%.
So we actually are in recession if you factor into account the
population. Because it means that the amount of money we have per head of population
is actually decreasing
year on year. And
I would just add to the things you've pointed out. I agree with those. I think the Mining Act, I think it's 2002 or something like that, and then obviously has been built on over time, notably around the Marikana stuff, and we've discussed that at relative length before. But the limitations that have been placed on mining in this country, and for that matter, oil and gas exploration, are another throttle. You know, I've said before, if you put me into government, you're going to get a lot of oil and gas drilling, and I would unleash the miners as well, because there just is a ridiculous amount of onerous regulation in that sector. And you go back, not long, you go back 30 years, 25 years even, and mining was by far the biggest industry in this country. But when I say by far, it multiples larger than anything else. And it employed millions of people. Someone like Cyril Ramaphosa becomes Cyril Ramaphosa because
Precisely
he's the head of the National Union of Mine Workers.
Yes.
And the National Union of Mine Workers was such a powerful position to occupy, the head of that union, because it was so many people. There was so much money involved, and you were dealing with the biggest players in the country. You were talking about Anglo-American at its prime, which makes discovery look like a joke. All right. And so
well, let's remember that at the time that Cyril Ramaphosa was handed control of Jonic was a top 40 company on the JSE. Jonic is now non-existent.
Defunct, yeah.
And the reason why it's defunct is because it was basically broken up and sold off in bits and pieces. Mm-hmm. And again, it's the looter mentality.
But Cyril got rich. I mean, that's what's important. Kevin.
Well, yes.
He's apparently a capitalist, I keep being told by people. He's a communist from the South African Communist Party who becomes the head of the largest trade union, uses that political capital to ultimately become one of the leaders in the ANC, writes the BEE laws, which then basically help him, Patrice Motsepe, who is his family, and Tokyo Sekwale as three main people, amongst others, obviously, gets literally given shares in companies worth hundreds of millions, ultimately billions of rands, ends up sitting on boards and getting paid ridiculous amounts of money, ends up being the hamburger king of South Africa. What does he know about McDonald's? Nothing. But he was the right black guy in the right position at the right time with the right laws written by him. And then I'm being told he's a capitalist, Kanthan. Please, can you set me straight?
So let's just go back a second to what you were saying in terms of the fact that we are not fracking and we are not drilling. Mm-hmm. Because we know that we have reserves under the Karoo, and we also have crude oil reserves off the Wild Coast.
That's right. And we also have gas reserves in Limpopo and Mpumalanga.
Correct. Now, so as you know, I run these training programs for journalists, and I've currently restarted it. And last week's class,
sorely needed, Kevin.
Last week's class was I was taking them through economics. Because as I tell them up front, some of the most stupid things that get said on air are said because people don't understand economics. And so one of the slides that I had to revise, because look, essentially I've been teaching this class for more than 20 years. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is that each year I have to go in and update the figures that are on there. So, for example, when I started teaching the class 20 years ago, China did not feature in terms of the top 5 economies of the world.
Yeah.
Okay, as perspective. But I have the slide where I talk about oil facts. Okay, and so a barrel of oil is most people don't know what a barrel is, but it's 42 US gallons, which is 159 liters. Now, in terms of oil production in South Africa, the last time I taught this class was around about 2017. And at that time, our oil production, and when we talk about oil production, I'm talking about what comes out of Sasol, was more than 200,000 barrels of oil per day. Our domestic oil production is now down to 110,000 barrels of oil per day.
Almost half.
Yeah. So we've lost half of that, but our oil consumption has gone up. So our consumption is now 610,000 barrels per day, which means that effectively we have a shortfall in order to run the country of 500,000 barrels of oil per day. Mm-hmm. So just to put some prices on this, okay, so the value of the oil that we're producing on a daily basis at current oil prices, 127 million rand. The consumption cost is 707 million rand per day. okay, which is close to $750 million that we are spending every day on fuel. And so the shortfall that we have to make up every single day, 580 million rand, is what we spend on importing fuel. And so the comparison that I look at, the oil price is 64.45. So if we were at 8 Rand to the US dollar, which is what we were under Thabo Mbeki, the 500,000 barrels a day would be costing us 269 million a day. If we were at 12.37 to the US dollar, which we were under Jacob Zuma, that oil would be costing us 398 million a day. But of course now, under Cyril, at 18 to the dollar, we are now spending $500 million a day just to ensure that vehicles in this country are able to run. And then I do a comparison with the fact that in Angola, you get fuel for 5 Rand a litre.
Because they dig it out of their own ground. That's why.
And more to the point, why are we not just simply trucking fuel in from Angola?
Or building a pipeline.
Yeah. Well, all of those things apply. So when we're drilling down to quick stuff that we can do in terms of fixing the economy, now none of the things that you and I have been discussing here are things that get flagged by the minister. And really what the minister needs to be doing is start his budget speech saying, if we implement the following things, we can do this. We currently cannot do this because of policy, and therefore this is the best possible framework that I'm able to produce. But no, they cannot do that for the reasons that you point out, because they are so embedded in this ideology that the very suggestion of considering something that might actually let the markets free doesn't actually fit into their viewfinder at all.
Yeah.
So I think we could very easily be looking at 7 to 8% growth if we were only to implement these very basic things. And the knock-on impact.
I just think the reason I asked the question is because I think, given the low base we come from, really, we've got. I don't buy the whole. I mean, the unemployment stats are obviously correct in terms of formal employment, but we know there's a lot of stuff that happens informally, and that's not measured. There's a lot of money that moves through the economy that's not measured. The township economy, so to speak. Just look at transport, for example. The biggest transport in this country is taxis, and that entire sector is untaxed, unregulated, and the money is an unknown. And I'm not saying we should force taxation there, although on fairness levels, most people think we should. But the point really is we're coming from such a low base in terms of economic participation in the formal economy that if we just release the reins and let the horses run, I feel as if we could hit growth well above 10% for several years.
Yes.
And if we just allowed sectors that need to operate, same story. So, mining, petrochemicals.
What you're saying is spot on, because in fact, the figures that we've been talking about so far is just going to be the knock-on impact in terms of deregulation. It does not make allowance for the fact that when you have deregulated, those businesses in of themselves suddenly have opportunities opened up to them that were not there previously.
So what happens if Sasol or another company, a new player, who knows, comes along and becomes one of the largest oil companies in the Southern Hemisphere or in the world? What if there's an re-interest in investment in terms of refineries? Because we know that's an area that's completely shrunk and de-skilled.
Well, again, this is another point where regulatory oversight has cost us, because remember that they shut down SAPREF because they insisted that Shell and BP spend an additional $4 billion in order to reduce emissions from the refinery.
To make the European Union happy.
Yes, but the overall impact of that is that we are now importing petrol directly instead of importing crude oil and refining it. And instead of now being able to refine the oil locally, which means that we then have all of the byproducts that then fund the petrochemical industry at large. So plastic bottles, for example, we can't make those anymore if we're importing petrol. We can if we are refining crude oil ourselves.
Face cream.
All of those things, yeah.
Vaseline. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good reason why it's called petroleum jelly, guys. Work with us here.
Yeah.
Who's going to sort out your chapped lips?
Yeah. In winter, they are bad.
Yeah. So I think, that's from the budget overview point of view, I think from a fiscal responsibility point of view and oversight point of view, it's a lot better than it was last year, which means that probably the wastage is not going to be as appalling as it has been in previous decades. Is it enough to actually claw us out of the morass that we're in? No.
Well, the problem is that wastage is only one side of the equation.
Yes.
And in fact, it's, in my opinion, less important. Over the long term, make an argument might be more important. Doge is obviously, what the United States is trying to do in terms of wastage. But the reason I say it's less important is if you're spending the money on the right things, if you're wasting a fair amount, then it's not the end of the world, because spending it on the right things will result in good outcomes. You'll get good value out of those things. And so it's like taking a bucket that has a hole in it, filling it with water, and you're going to walk a certain distance and you're going to lose a percentage of the water. But if that bucket is going to water some seeds that you've just put in the ground, then you can kind of accept a little bit of wastage from that hole.
Yes.
If you're only then taking that water to throw it on desert ground and nothing will happen, then wasting some of it along the way was pointless.
Yes.
Irrelevant.
It's a good analogy. Yeah.
And so, that's really, and this is the problem with the DA actually. And I'm going to become known as a DA basher, but the reality is that we know the problem we have is twofold. One is the ANC steals from the fiscus. And the other thing is that where and how they want to spend the money is incorrect. Their thinking is wrong. And the DA comes in and goes, we can fix the part where you steal the money.
Yes.
We can be good bureaucrats.
But they can't fix the part around the thinking. So to that point,
yes.
Okay. So one of the issues that comes up in terms of the division of revenue bill, which basically, so the budget is a 3-stage process. There's the budget speech, which outlines the broad brushstrokes, and then you have the appropriations bill, which is where stuff gets taken from, and then the division of revenue is where the money gets distributed. And one of the things that is going to feature quite strongly this year is an expanded public works program.
Yeah.
And the expanded public works program, which basically this year is going to create, let me just get this number, 7,374 full-time positions for municipal bureaucrats, basically, of which the city of Cape Town is probably going to be the single biggest beneficiary. There's going to be 194 bureaucrats that are scheduled for an uptick in the size of the municipal government of Cape Town.
That doesn't make me excited at all.
Well, this is my point, okay? Because remember, what you are doing is you're not creating jobs, because this is not productive money. It is extractive money that is coming from the ratepayers.
Correct.
And if that money that you are spending is not directly improving the life of the ratepayers to the extent where their financial situation is better off, it doesn't work. And you've probably seen the relative outrage around the selective rate hikes that have been taking place down in Cape Town. And again, this is not a DA bashing thing. It's just pointing out that the mindset is just completely flawed.
But the mindset in general, someone recently posted on a WhatsApp group I'm on, images from Manenberg. And in Manenberg, the DA have built a beautiful stadium, training ground and a formal stadium, a track, and it looks magnificent. It's beautiful. The mayor is very proud of it. Excellent. And so he should be. My problem is this. Who paid for that? Because it sure as hell wasn't the residents of Manenberg.
It was not the residents of Manenberg.
Okay,
absolutely.
So then the question is, okay, who paid for it? And we know the answer because the DA tells us who pays for it. The people in Rondebosch and the people in Gardens and the people in Observatory and the people in Sea Point and the people in Camps Bay, etc., paid for that.
Yes.
And then I say, all right, where is the new stadium, training ground, etc., in the City Bowl? Doesn't exist, Kanthan. Why? No, those are privileged people. They don't need things. We can just take their money and we can reinvest it. And this podcast probably won't exist by the time this happens. But the DA will lose power as a result of this eventually. Because eventually enough people will turn around and go, I am tired of paying for other places to look beautiful, to have well-tarred roads, to be taken care of, when my own area is not taken care of. Now, in fairness, the city of Cape Town does a very good job, or a much better job than many other places in South Africa in terms of looking after.
The Western Cape generally, yes.
We know that. But there's only so far you can go. And what I saw with this rates hike was the first signs of that, was people in those areas, the middle class, turning around and going, sorry, our services are okay, they're adequate, but they're not amazing. We're willing to pay what we're paying, but we feel that that's already quite a lot. You now want to increase that by 20% and above. What the hell? And we know you're taking our money.
Against a backdrop of GDP growth
Yes.
of 0.6%.
Which means people aren't getting richer.
Yes, people are getting poorer, yes.
Yeah. I think, when we speak about GDP, it's a number that might not matter to people. It's like if you go to the average person on the street and you go, the rand-dollar exchange rate today is 18.30 or whatever it is.
Nobody really understands how it affects them.
It doesn't necessarily mean anything to them. Same with GDP.
Yeah, which is exactly why when I'm teaching these youngsters about economics, I drill down into things like what is the effect of the rand-dollar exchange rate on the price of fuel, which ultimately then ends up affecting how much you are spending. And just imagine now if you are freeing up, just based on a rand-dollar exchange rate, a $250 million rand a day that is currently being spent. That just basically goes out of the country to fuel that we are buying. And
what I find interesting is that our journalists are very upset when we spend a tenth of that on diesel for Eskom. Okay? But they cannot bring themselves to be upset about us spending that amount of money a day on fuel when there are clearly other alternatives, as you've outlined.
Yes.
It's just an interesting sort of point to note that the things that people do get upset about don't get upset about, the stuff that is reported, the stuff that isn't reported.
But again, this drills down to the competence in terms of the various people who are elected to office. And if you look down in terms of the various players that the DA has, a number of people have been commenting on this, that in terms of their either their qualifications or their experience, none of the current DA appointees are actually fit for purpose in their roles.
Yeah, so I made this point, and I was given hell about it because I got a whataboutism. So what I did was I went and researched all the DA ministers and the DA deputy ministers. And some of them are, I don't even know some of the deputy ministers. It's like, but I asked then ChatGPT to then tell me what the qualifications of each of those ministers was. And I then went and checked it myself to make sure there was no errors. And it turns out that not a single minister or deputy minister is fit for purpose. Now, the whataboutism I got is, but the ANC, this and the ANC. Yes, but Aaron Motsoaledi is actually a medical doctor. I don't think he's fit for purpose to be the health minister, and I can give many reasons for that. But I'm not talking about the ANC right now. Okay, he is actually a medical doctor, and there are other people. Josiento Ramaphosa, for example, is actually an engineer.
Yes.
So he has a reason to be the inverted commas electricity minister. Not that we should have one of those, but he has a reason. John Steenhuisen famously has no qualifications. So how or why he should be the Minister of Agriculture is a good question to be asked. Okay. Siviwe Gwarube has no experience in education. Her degrees were all focused on becoming a politician. The closest the DA gets And I can go through all of them, but it's not that interesting. Just trust me that the Minister of Communications has no qualifications in communications or technology. The Minister
Well,
of...
it's a combination. It doesn't necessarily have to be qualifications, but at least if you worked in the industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I made the point saying I'm not huge on credentials, but you have to have something to offer. I believe that I could offer something in a government role. But if I picked up the phone today and on the other side of the line was Cyril Ramaphosa or John Steenhuisen or whoever, and they said to me, we'd really love for you to come and work in the Department of Water and Sanitation, I would say, I'm sorry, I don't know anything about water and sanitation.
But you'd be very silly to not do it because, John,
you've made this point, so go for it.
Yeah, so, but basically, you would do a better job than the current lot do, simply because of the fact that you know your limitations, and more to the point, you know the correct people to ask for advice on specific things.
And so understanding how systems function, not necessarily specific systems knowledge, is relevant. And so I did make the point.
I'll use my own example that, at the point at which I took over ETV News,
yes,
I'd never worked in television before.
Yes.
Okay. And within the space of 2 years, we were sitting at double SABC's audience. Mm-hmm. Okay. When I took over YFM, but I'd never worked in radio before. But the understanding of business processes, which comes from actually working in business and understanding.
So I will continue with the DA bashing, because the truth is when you look at those people and the fact that they neither have those degrees nor have the background, and in fairness, nor seem to have the system understanding enough to be in positions of that kind of power. Now, I did make an exception. I said that arguably the person who's best suited would be someone like Ashur Sarapen, who is Deputy Minister of Finance. He has an MBA. It's not in economics. None of his degrees focused on that. But in fairness, you don't do an MBA without doing stats. You don't do an MBA without doing some sort of finance-related stuff. And Ashur has involved himself quite deeply in understanding financial matters and funding and World Bank, IMF stuff for years. I know because I spoke to him many years ago about this kind of stuff, and he has base knowledge. He's also a smart guy, and so he probably has the system understanding. And I think you're probably seeing that. Those changes you're talking about in the budget, in terms of systems and processes, I would bet that came from him. And so the point I was making is just to say that there's a lot of people in positions that the DA have put up, arguably all of them, but I've made an exception already, but arguably the majority who just don't have what it takes to be in the positions. Neither do the ANC guys.
Correct.
But that's not what the point I'm making. The point I'm making is the whole idea is that the DA is better. That's their selling point. Okay.
So the two seismic things that are kind of happening right now, that none of these players are actually able to get their head around. Okay. On the one hand is the shifting of the Overton window in terms of globalists versus nationalism. Okay. And right now, neither of the parties who are controlling this country get that
at all.
Yes, they're completely clueless from their perspective. They're still looking in terms of World Economic Forum, free trade, open borders, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the idea of what has currently been taking off like wildfire around the world, and Trump is now essentially the champion of this. Mm-hmm. That you work trade deals in the best interests of your own people. And right now, we don't have either of these parties able to work out what's in the best interests of our own people, because they don't have a clue what's in the best interests of our own people. So this shift right now that's happening on the world stage, they still want to keep doing business with the EU, borrowing money from the EU to implement solar power solutions in the country, when we could just simply be drilling and solving our problems
and getting rich, and amongst other
so
things.
Again, that's stuff that's not part of the discussion. And of course, the second thing that they're not factoring in at all is how they're going to take advantage of jumping onto the AI gravy train. And remember, the most crucial thing in terms of getting access to the AI gravy train is you need cheap energy. It's electricity.
Yeah.
Cheap electricity is what's needed to actually make this work. Right now, no one's going to come and build a massive data center in South Africa that's going to be having 100,000 GPUs in it, simply because of the fact that we don't have the ability to be running the generators that are producing that level of electricity that's
And
needed.
not only that, 30 years ago, our energy was some of the cheapest in the world.
Yes.
If our energy was still some of the cheapest in the world, then we would be attracting data centers. Simple as that. We
Yes.
would be building data centers here because the likes of Microsoft, for example, would be saying, well, that is a very cheap area to buy electricity. And what's more, we can do it in dollars. And so it's a no-brainer. But at the moment, as you say, reliability of supply, and on the other side of things, the cost.
So if you understand that basic disconnect, I think this is a good point for us to now segue into
What happened.
went down in Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that entire inability on the part of our leaders to recognize that shift that's happening on the global stage is at the heart of what went down at that meeting between Trump and Ramaphosa.
So I think it's a great way to segue. And I think what I want to mention first, and I've watched the meeting 2.5 times now, and I've paid quite a lot of attention to it. But I want to point out the format of meetings that's now occurring. So traditionally, how it worked, and you can go back and look at Ramaphosa meeting with Biden, you can go back and even look at meetings with Trump in his first administration, and then all the administrations prior to that. The way it works is the people in the back end, working with Department of State and whoever your foreign affairs is, working between the different trade organizations, they would, in the weeks running up to a meeting like this, they would have back channel talks and they would be resolving everything and they'd be drawing up documents. And essentially the meeting between the two presidents was a formality, which is why the things that you knew about when your president went to the White House was, today Barack Obama is welcoming the Prime Minister of Norway to the White House, and they'll be having traditional sashimi, or, no, that's not obviously Norwegian, but they'll be having salmon and whatever. And, they would talk about the food that they were going to serve for lunch, and they would talk about the cutlery and the crockery that was being used and why that was relevant, because 60 years before some other Norwegian guy had come along, and that was the conversation. And then really it was handshakes and lots of flowers and flags and some signing of documents sometimes at desks, and then a collegiate press conference. And that was how this worked. And the presidents were there to basically rubber stamp things and show everyone, look, we're working together as two countries. That's not how this works anymore, not for Trump at least. Trump doesn't have any agreements before the time. Now, there may be talks about what you're going to discuss, about what each side wants, but nothing is sealed before that meeting. And then you come to that meeting and he wants to have an open conversation with you. So open that the entire Oval Office gets filled with press at the back end, which is what you didn't see. They're all standing beside and behind the Resolute desk. And then in front of that is a lounge area, if you know the Oval Office. And by the fireplace at the one, it's not a corner because it's an oval, but the one side of the room is where Trump sits with whoever his interlocutor is. And on both sides are then couches where the American side sits and the other side sits. And there's a conversation that occurs. And this is not something that's happened before, because diplomacy is meant to be traditionally this thing where you use specific words. And I'm not making this up. There are literally diplomacy courses you can go on.
No, for sure.
There are handbooks that they give you where they teach you about the words you're allowed to say, the things you're allowed to do.
Which is, our politicians make this point of saying all protocols observed.
That's correct.
Yes.
There's literally, there are people that travel with delegations explaining the protocol. Trump's thrown that all out the window. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to have open, transparent, honest. You might not like them. You might not say what he says is honest. But the bottom line is he's having an open conversation between parties. And so you end up having what happened with Zelensky. You end up having what happened with Keir Starmer, where Keir Starmer says things you otherwise wouldn't expect to hear in an open forum.
Yes.
But he's kind of forced to say them because Trump's put him in that scenario. Obviously, the fight that happened with Zelensky, and then now what's happened with Ramaphosa and the South African delegation, and it's just fascinating to me to have seen that shift and to understand that entire change that's happened in these meetings. We're not going to do this behind closed doors completely anymore. We're going to show the world what our concerns are. We're going to have real conversations. They might get tense. We might not like what each other has to say, but that's how it's going to be. And I hope this continues with all countries because I think it is far more useful and it has the potential, we'll see, but it has the potential of changing diplomacy and public politics globally forever. And by doing that, it has the potential to also change who the candidates are going forward, because politics has become this subterfuge where politicians never say what they mean. Everything is bathed in metaphors and promises of great things, and nothing is real. And this is forcing kind of real conversations to be had. And I think that's what you saw in the White House the other day.
And more to the point, it's not something unique in the case right now of Ramaphosa. Mm-hmm. It's been the pattern ever since Trump 2.0 entered the stage.
Yep.
And he's always got his trusted lieutenants on stage with him. Very often he will actually call upon them to answer the question, which again is a break with protocol. Because normally when the questions are put forward, the head of state is the person who does the answering. Trump is this is my team, and I'm going to hand over to JD. I'm going to hand over to Pete Hegseth or whoever it is, and because he trusts them to actually understand what's going on, because they've actually done their homework.
The subject matter knowledge, right?
Yeah.
I think so. First to say about that meeting is that the reporting around it, and we can get to this at the end, but the reporting around it has been so terrible that if you have been watching mainstream news and relying on anything mainstream, I don't think you've been told what happened in that meeting. And there were some very interesting things that happened in that meeting that haven't been focused on. So I just want to rattle a couple off if you will indulge me. Mm-hmm. First thing is, almost nothing happened in the first 15 minutes and 40 seconds. Okay, pleasantries between Trump and Ramaphosa blowing smoke up Trump's arse about the size of their economy.
So let me just say, in terms of that point, by the way,
yes,
I thought that opening statement from Ramaphosa was the most presidential I've seen the guy being in a long time. Now, admittedly, it's a low bar, but get this point, okay, that he struck all of the right notes. Okay, he spoke about the historical relationship between South Africa and the United States. He spoke about the existing trade relationships between South Africa
companies doing business,
and the companies doing business, and
the fact that we want their help.
Yes, and more importantly, everything that he said there was in fact pandering to Trump's
agree.
ego
and
at a number of levels.
If that had been the way we did meetings before, that would have continued with the tone, and that would have been it. And there were some questions that happened in between, journalists asking about other things.
Yeah. But I just wanted to make that point about Ramaphosa, because I thought that his opening salvo
was relatively good.
It was relatively good, and but I interrupt you. Let's just go back to that flow.
The first 15 minutes, was not much, and a little bit of Ramaphosa trying to manage the situation, trying to create a narrative about South Africa. And the one comment I'll just say to what you've just said is that, yes, he did do relatively well in summarizing that stuff, but it was also trying to create a certain narrative. And I thought my original prediction before this was no fireworks. And then Trump did let's turn down the lights, because Ramaphosa was in the middle of narrative. Okay. And he got to the video, but I'll get to the video just now.
Yeah, but remember that before he got to the point where he said turn down the lights, it was because of the fact that you had this reporter. You said now it was Annika Larsen, who is the person who said to the president, I'm going to paraphrase, but it was something like, what is it going to take to convince you that there's no genocide in South Africa? And if that had not entered the discussion, I do not think that video would have been played. Because what that did was to give the opportunity for Trump to say, no, hang on a second. I've actually got you on
so
this
the
one.
question gets asked, the genocide question gets asked. And in fact, Trump, you can see Trump's thinking how to respond.
Yes.
He sort of tilts his head back and forth and he taps his hands and he's about to answer. And Ramaphosa says, let me answer for that. And then Ramaphosa tries to give this very diplomatic, very sort of saccharine answer to the question. And that is, that is the point at which Trump goes, bring me the papers and just turn down the lights. And then he puts the video on. So the first thing is that nothing happened in the first 15 minutes. That's point one. Then we got all the stuff. The second thing to say is that Trump never used the word genocide. So if you are reading, not a single time, the word genocide didn't come from his mouth a single time. Even when he was asked about genocide, he didn't respond with the word genocide, ever. So if you're reading somewhere Trump's claims of white genocide, if you are reading the word genocide and some sort of Trump said, Trump did in relation to this meeting, that never happened at all. Go watch the tapes. Be my guest. I have 2.5 times, as I said. So he never said the word genocide. The third thing to point out is that Trump was congratulated and thanked by Ramaphosa, seemingly genuinely, for solving the Rwanda-Congo war. Yes. Okay. And in fact, Trump deferred to one of his aides at that time to discuss the peace agreement and the progress on the peace agreement that is taking place, okay, which is well developed at this point. That's not reported at all. At all.
So I don't know if I discussed this point with you. I certainly did share it with Roman Kabanak in a chat over the past couple of weeks when I first became aware of the fact that Trump had basically brokered this deal in the DRC. And my sources in this case, which are actually quite reliable, said he basically went to Rwanda and told Kagame, you are getting the hell out of the DRC, and here's some money for you, and go away and consider your engagement there at an end. And trust me, if you do not do this, then we will be coming after you. What do you want to do? And Kagame says, sure, let's do it. Again, no reporting on this stuff. Well, like I said, I knew about it weeks ago, that the fact that this was playing out. Very similar stuff went down in terms of the conflict between India and Pakistan.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Again, it was
also mentioned in the meeting.
Yes.
But I think the African stuff is relevant.
Yes.
Because first it was mentioned. It was discussed for 2 minutes of the meeting probably, which is a fair portion of that. And Ramaphosa personally thanked and congratulated Trump on doing that and admitted SADC's own failures to have achieved the same things that Trump has done in 100 days. So, that wasn't reported on at all. And then, the last sort of global point that I want to make before we get into the details and specifics is that there was no ambush, okay? The South African delegation, this is the word that's been used, ambush.
Yes.
The South African delegation went with who they chose to go with, a large delegation of people, including John Steenhuisen as Minister of Agriculture, trade unionists, Johan Rupert, obviously, the golfers. That was a choice they made. Trump chose to come with his people. Pete Hegseth was there. Elon Musk was there. Scott Bessent, not Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick was there. That was the American contingent.
And in fact, the only reason why Marco Rubio wasn't there was Marco Rubio was
testifying to the Senate.
Yes, exactly.
And ripping them a new arsehole, I might add. If you want to go get some entertainment for the week, go look at Marco Rubio's Senate hearings. Very, very good, very entertaining. Marco Rubio it's him and JD who are the shoes in for the top of that ticket in 28. Rubio is exceptional, but it's a separate topic for another time.
Yes.
And he really has come into his own. He's something else. But the point is Trump came with his show and tell, and that we came with our show and tell.
But John, the basic point is there is nothing that Trump said in that meeting that he has not been saying on public platforms.
Yes.
Since the start of the year.
Right. So maybe let's get to the video, because I want to point out that those videos have been in circulation for years. Years. All right. I saw that cross video. So the video that was played, for those of you who didn't see it, essentially was made up of clips of Julius Malema singing Kill the Boer, also saying, talking about land,
expropriation,
yeah. Talking about land expropriation. And then it had Andile Mngxitama also talking about violence and land expropriation. And then it had the video, which is from 2020, where two farmers, a husband and a wife, were murdered brutally on their farm. And in fact, the Kifness, David tweeted about it earlier in the week, where he spoke about those people because he happened to go to school with their son.
Yes.
So he's quite close to that whole story. And after that happened, that protest was organized by the Afrikaans community, who then took a cross for every person they know who's died in a farm attack over the past 20 years and lined them up along a road.
Yes.
And someone flew over in a helicopter with all the cars parked next to each cross. And it just goes on for kilometers. And the crosses are only 3, 4, 5 meters apart, not more than that. And then, of course, they've taken all these crosses, and there is a location where on a mountain or a hilltop, these crosses have all been erected.
Visible from the N1, I must point out.
Yes. I want to get to that. Okay. I do want to get to that. Visible, yes. These crosses have been put up as a memorial, but also to shock you, because it's over 1,000 crosses. So it's a representation of 1,000 dead people, which Trump clearly stated. Right. The one thing he said was something like, it's a burial ground. Okay. And NBC went off. No, it's not an actual burial ground.
No,
okay, guys.
But the fact is that every cross there represents
someone who's in the ground.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of them might have been cremated, Kanthan. I suppose I'm going to get hit on fake news because I said they're in the ground. This is the what they play with. So that was the video gets played, and obviously the Americans are watching this. The South Africans, the reaction to it was completely inappropriate in many instances. So some of the South African delegation was fine. Rupert and Els and Goosen and Steenhuisen and I didn't see everyone else, but everyone else seemed to be okay. What's the one lady that was there that's accused of stealing billions in Shaveni? She had like a smile on her face.
She had a shit-eating grin on her face
I don't know what. Listen, even if you're listening to that, I mean, I get why that might have occurred. She's hearing Julius Malema, and maybe she thinks Julius Malema is a clown.
Yes.
There's a fair chance she does think that. Many people in the ANC think that. And so she's hearing Julius Malema and is just going, oh, this idiot, and that's why she's got that grin on her face. But you're in the Oval Office.
And you're not following the conversation.
Yes.
And I'd like to draw a correlation now with Zelensky's appearance in the Oval Office. And there was Zelensky's ambassador to the U.S. sitting a short distance away, and you could watch her face just basically drop
Yes.
to say...
She actually had a hand on her face.
Yeah,
at
she
one
had a
point.
hand on her face because she appreciated the seriousness of what was going down.
Yes.
And in the case of our delegation, there was none of that gravitas being attached to the stuff that Trump was actually putting forward out there. But just to harp on that point about the White Cross memorial.
I think harp on it because it's been sold as misinformation.
No, the point
and
the point that I want to harp on that I found so critically embarrassing was when Ramaphosa says, "I don't know where this is. Where is it?"
Yes.
And Trump says it's in South Africa.
Yes.
Now, and I'd made the point in a piece that I wrote a couple of days prior.
I see. You clickbaited the article.
No. Look, essentially the point that I was making, and it wasn't. Remember that the reason why I put these things out there is to give perspective that people are not thinking of. And the fact is that there are more than 103,000 direct employees of the various intelligence agencies, 18 of them, that are providing information to the Trump administration 24/7. And if for a second anyone thinks that Trump doesn't know what's going on in South Africa, you're utterly clueless.
Yeah, I mean, we've made this point before.
Yes.
Other people have tried.
But now, when you have a situation where the president should know this, because it is literally on his route to the Union buildings, right?
Well, that plus, you are instructing your state security agency to consider treason charges against AfriForum, as an example. You're going to the States where the claim is that it's not the intelligence agencies, it's AfriForum who are informing the American administration directly, and none of it's getting verified or checked. Okay, that's your claim, at least. So if that's your claim, then surely you would find all the information that AfriForum has put out there. You would get your people, your chief of staff, to collate that, and then you would look at all of that, and you would be able to say, all right, if they bring any of these following things up, this is how we're going to tackle each of them, right? Instead of turning around and saying, I don't know where this is, and trying to make as if it's not your country, when it clearly is your country. And then, Trump went on about that for quite a long time. He used that to respond repeatedly to journalists asking questions, where he turned around where they were like, well, but this and that, or where John Steenhuisen even turned around when he got the opportunity, and I do want to talk about what he said, but when he got the opportunity, Trump subsequently said, yes, but, look at all the dead people. And it constantly allowed Trump to talk about the dead people. Now, if you knew that was coming, you could have maybe offset it a little bit. You could have said, yes, this is a problem, as John Steenhuisen, in fairness, did try to do in his answer. This is a problem, but this, and mitigate it in certain ways, which was what Johan Rupert was trying to direct.
But again, Steenhuisen was raising, he was trying to say that black farmers get affected as well.
Yeah.
Trump was not wanting to hear who else is dying.
Yes.
What Trump wanted to know was, what are you going to do to fix this problem?
Yes.
Okay, we know that there are all of these other problems that we have. Yeah. That crime is rampant in your country, that you have porous borders, all of that kind of stuff. But what are you going to do to fix this problem? Don't tell us about your other problems that are preventing your fixing it. Because the single thing that distinguishes this president from all of the other presidents that have come before is that he has that ability to actually separate out issues.
And singular focus on certain things.
Yes. And he absolutely hones in on it, and he says, I want this problem solved, and I want it solved now. So it's not like we're going to have a workshop for the next 3 years to come up with a plan that we then implement in 20 years' time.
Yes.
No, I actually want a solution that I'm going to see you guys coming up with right now. And again, Steenhuisen didn't respond in a way that could have actually addressed that particular point.
So my issue with how John responded is that he tried to be diplomatic. I think he was. And he's gotten kudos from his own party essentially for being a diplomat. That didn't impress me for a few reasons. Number one is that wasn't what the moment needed. Number two is John has, if he's lucky, 4 years left in politics. Okay. Now, you make something of yourself in politics by recreating yourself. That's how the game is played.
And you recognize when you have an opportunity.
And you recognize when you're given that on a the most tremendous platter, Trump platter, golden platter. And he didn't take it. He didn't take it. He didn't take the opportunity to talk about all the things his party has spent 20, 30 years fighting against the ANC on. The last 5 years, some of the things they've got in court cases on are going against the ANC. He didn't take the opportunity. He said rural safety is a problem. Again, not focusing on the primary issue Trump's talking about. He tried to talk about a little bit into how America might help with that stuff and the resources we require to deal with that, and then tried to pivot onto being at NAMPO and it being a big trade show and that most farmers want to remain here. Again, completely
ignoring
missing
the point.
Mm-hmm. And if John wanted to make a difference, what he should have done was the ambush word should be one that could have been applied to John.
Yes.
John should have ambushed Cyril. John should have ambushed the ANC. John should have ambushed the entire system. John should have turned around and said, you know what, Mr. President, you're absolutely right. In fact, I am from an opposition party, and my opposition party disagrees vehemently with the things that Mr. Ramaphosa's party has been doing for the last 30 years. We have laws that prevent white people, Indian people, colored people from getting jobs over black people. We have laws that prevent people from owning businesses like Mr. Musk over there. We have laws that prevent foreign investment like Starlink is trying to do. If John was smart, he would have taken the opportunity to agree with Trump, to highlight the things Trump doesn't even realize or know in detail, and to bring those to the fore and to maybe top it off at the end by giving the very clear solutions. Our government should immediately repeal all race-based legislation. And that's what I'm here to ask you guys to help us do today and to apply the pressure that's needed. That's what a good politician would have done. That's what a good leader would have done. And that's what someone with integrity would have done.
But he lacks all of those.
Yeah,
which we've seen time and again.
It's just very, very unfortunate. And then obviously the others had stuff to say. I mean, I don't think we need to. I mean, it's a bit of a joke. Johan Rupert saying he sleeps with unlocked doors. I mean,
again, so that was another. So the points of embarrassment. Okay, firstly, Cyril saying that he does not know where it is, and as the president of the country, and this has been a focal point. It was splashed across the public broadcaster at the time when it happened, and the visible proof of it is there every single day on the biggest road in Africa.
Well, the other thing is Cyril lied openly. So there's a point at which Trump asks, post the video. They're talking about this stuff, and Trump asks why Malema hasn't been arrested. And he's basically making the point, if anyone else in any kind of civilized country were to stand up in position of power like that, where there is violence taking place and was shouting for people to be murdered, they would be arrested. And which is an interesting point for an American president to make, because the Americans are big on free speech. But they seem to think that this crosses the line. Okay, I think that would be a very interesting test at the Supreme Court. But the point really is that he then asks Trump asks Cyril directly in these words, have you condemned it?
And Cyril lied.
And Cyril openly says, yes, we have. Yes, we have, and we do.
And it was a bald-faced lie.
Complete and utter bald-faced lie, to the point that Cyril has recently been recorded, as has the entire ANC, have been recorded defending the singing of Kill the Boer, celebrating the court ruling and the fact that the Constitutional Court would not hear the matter.
But again, the fundamental issue that he should have said was, well, the reason why he's able to do this is because we have a captured judiciary, and I'm part of the reason why we have a captured judiciary.
Well, he's not going to say that, obviously.
I'm just trying to think in thought balloons here. Work with me.
Yeah. Okay, I'm with you. We're workshopping.
Yeah.
We're post workshopping. There was that, and the problem you now have is, of course, Trump then goes on and says and does say things where this is where the misinformation comes from. This is where the journalists will be able to say, well, Trump said this and that's not actually fully the case. And so one of the things Trump says is, there's farmers and there's farms being taken and people being killed for their farms. And so I think if you're watching this from the United States, you may say, may think that's what's happening. That's not really how it works. It's funny that Retief Goosen kind of made the point that his brothers can't leave their farm for too long, otherwise, essentially, they will get invaded. So that's an important point. I think what's important to note about South Africa at the moment is that we have EWC, so Expropriation Without Compensation Act passed, which says that the government can take land without giving you anything, which they haven't done yet. So the government hasn't gone to any large amounts of farmland and taken anyone's land and said, get off, we're not giving you anything. That hasn't occurred. What has occurred is that when people settle on either urban or farmland.
When people ambush you.
Yeah, and this has happened.
Yes.
There's thousands of cases of
Yes.
this, okay? And we call them, in this country, informal settlements. And people just accept that informal settlements are a thing. But what an informal settlement is people have built their own shacks on land that does not belong to them. Sometimes it's state land. Very often it's private land. Go look at Kaya Sands in Johannesburg. An entire township has developed there, an informal settlement has developed there on private land. The government has not lifted a single finger to prevent any of those land invasions. And where there have been fingers, inverted commas, lifted, that's only occurred because people have forced the courts to act. And so, and even in some cases, the courts don't act. And so, yes, is it entirely true to say you're taking the farms? No, it's not entirely true to say that. The government is not yet. And that's the important word, because they can today if they want to, tomorrow if they want to, in a month, in a year, in 10 years. They've passed the law that says they can. But they're not today doing it.
But at the same time, let's also remember that both our president and the deputy president have spoken on the need for expropriation without compensation.
And both fully.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So on that note, by the way, I must point out that the video that Trump ended up showing, he could very well have included the clips of Ramaphosa. He did not. Make no mistake, he's got access to that.
Yes.
He knows
and
about
that
it.
clip went around straight after. It went around
Correct.
the internet.
He could have put up the clip of Ronald Lamola
Yes.
using
Yes,
more
he
or
didn't-
less the same
He
words.
didn't use any clips of the people in the meeting.
Correct. And he could have. And my point is that he was getting
That's
the
a
message
choice.
across. Yes, it was a choice. Yeah, it was an omission, but it was a strategic omission, because anyone who thinks that Trump is not aware of that. So was he aware at the point at which Ramaphosa said, yes, we condemn it? Was he aware that Ramaphosa was lying? Yes. Is he going to turn around and say, no, actually, you're lying? No. That's stuff that will be put on the side, because then when the fine print comes around in terms of how these deals play themselves out, which is the crucial point that people forget. Because remember that the meat of what is on the table had already been discussed by the time that they got to the Oval Office, right?
Some of it.
Yes.
So some of it after.
Yeah.
There was a meeting after.
Correct,
that
but
took
there was a
place.
1.5 hour meeting before. And I think the bulk of what would have been agreed upon as the broad brushstrokes for things that need to be resolved would have been tabled at that meeting. And if you take the view that at the point at which the South African delegation sat down in front of the media with the U.S. delegation, that they were not looking unhappy at that point. So I think we can also take the view that the broad brushstrokes of what the Americans have put on the table are things that the South African delegation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before we throw forward into what we think is going to happen, I think you and I might disagree slightly there.
I'm not making predictions in terms of what I think is going to happen,
but-
because the
but what
devil,
the
the devil
Americans
is going to
will
be in
ask
the
for.
detail. Yeah.
But before we get to that, which kind of then the meeting discussion is I think over. The rest of the meeting, Trump also had paperwork, a stack of papers of people who had been brutally attacked or murdered, which he then used to shellac a journalist because someone asked some stupid comment, and then he just went through literal photos of people, who had terrible injuries and all the rest of it, and then handed that stack of papers quite uncomfortably to Ramaphosa, in terms of how Ramaphosa received that. The rest of the meeting, there wasn't that much of interest. I want to point out, just again, a failure. Either it was people just grasping at straws and trying to salvage something in that space and trying to change the subject, or it's a failure of logic. I'm not sure which. So you heard repeatedly Ramaphosa, Rupert, John Steenhuisen to a point, made comments about helping us with our problems and technology. I think they got told that, they need to appeal to Musk because Musk is the technology guy. And so if they say they want drones and technology, then, they'll appease the Americans. And this was sold as we need technology in order to combat crime, because Johan Rupert's very worried about crime on the Cape Flats. It must be terribly bothersome to him when he drives past there in his Rolls Royce or Bentley, or flies over in his helicopter. And I don't understand what the hell they think they're going to do with drones. Okay? Let's run through the logic of this. Right? Our crime is, certainly our violent crime, is mainly either organized crime, things like hijackings, even house robberies to a point, where obviously it's organized and they sell to, central points and all the rest of it. Or it's just violent crime. It's individuals or groups of individuals who decide to go commit certain violent crimes against the populace. Drones are not necessarily going to be useful to that, but let's assume they were. Let's assume we got 10,000 drones given us to us tomorrow. 10,000 drones means you need 10,000 people who can fly those drones. 10,000 drones means you need several thousand people who can service those drones. 10,000 drones means that when your 10,000 drones flying in the air, let's say you put 1,000 in the air at the time across the country, and let's say of the 1,000, 5%, 50 drones pick up criminal activity. You've then got to actually dispatch resources to deal with that criminal activity. We do not have resources to deal with that. We know this because we don't have drones currently. And if someone is literally breaking into my house and I phone the police, the chances are they will arrive at my house several hours later, if ever.
So, John, I think take the view that Steenhuisen had not thought that through. Okay,
you think?
No. He. Okay, it's like, what can I say to this guy that'll get him on side? Let me ask him for drones, because that's something that I know.
He didn't specifically, but Rupert did.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. But again, Rupert's a guy who says that he sleeps with his door open. Again with his
militia. He's got a militia. He's got a private militia.
Yeah. So, yes, points of embarrassment. But I think if we drill back to where this is going to end up going, I think that what's very clear is that we're not going to come out of this with a tariff-free situation, because no one in the world is getting a tariff-free situation.
Well, India is.
Well, it's still going to be in the 10% range.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I think Trump is very clear that 10% is going to be the lowest that he's prepared to go. And I think everyone's already priced that in to whatever plans they have. The question, of course, then comes about in terms of what happens around AGOA, whether that means that we get maxed out at 10% at that point. I don't know the answer to that. Is there likely to be reciprocity written into the trade agreement at that level? I think yes. If we are not giving the US, 10%, then the other way around is not going to work as well. Trump currently makes the point of equating VAT as a tariff of sorts, because he says that it disproportionately ends up affecting American producers. And he's right in one way, because South African businesses that are producing those goods already have VAT costs priced into actual production of whatever it is that they're putting together.
Yeah, and they can also claim against their VAT, etc.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is not the case with with foreign companies. And whatever you may say about Trump, he is a numbers guy when it comes down to that type of thing. And
so hopefully we've summarized what happened in the Oval relatively well. As I say, I'm incredibly disappointed, but not surprised that the mainstream media has essentially completely lied about what occurred there. But are you saying you think overall there's potential for, it wasn't a disaster, there's potential for a good outcome?
No, I'm saying that right now it all depends on what Ramaphosa agreed to in the back office outside of the public scrutiny, and whether he agreed to relent on all of the race-based policies that the ANC has been instituting. Because if there's going to be a single point at which this relationship is going to die, it is going to be on that specific point. And I'll throw back to Elon Musk being interviewed in Qatar just a few days before.
Yeah.
And he was asked the question with regard to Starlink, in terms of, whether, he was being fair around, insisting that.
Well, they said that the South African government was going to make a carve out for him.
Yes.
And he said, well, the question you should be asking is
why do you have race-based policies in the first place?
Is why do you have race-based policies? And then he forced the journalist. He said, "Do you agree with that with racist laws?"
And she kept saying, "It's not for me to answer that." And he says, "No, but
you wanted a yes or no answer from
this
her.
is a yes or no.
Yeah.
Do you agree with racist laws?" He says, "We all agree that apartheid was wrong. Why are we replacing one set of racist laws with another set of racist laws?" And again, he called back to the Mandela days and said, this is not what Nelson Mandela had promised the people of South Africa.
Yeah. I think, look, I view that meeting as a little bit of a disaster because I think I understand the ANC. And so a pragmatic party would come away from that meeting and they would say something to the effect of, look, we can't afford to have the USA as an enemy. And they would look at all of the stuff they're doing and they may still think that this stuff is necessary because they do. The left in this country is never going to let go of this stuff. But how much harder do you want to be, guys, before you'll accept that it's not working? I get that on paper you think it works and like it looks like it works and it should work, but you've been trying it for 20 odd years. It's not working. Maybe you should stop doing it and try something else. And so I think a pragmatic party would do that. I don't know that we have any of those. So I look at the reaction from Gayton McKenzie, who cheered on Cyril Ramaphosa, and, basically made negative comments about the meeting from the American side. I would have thought Gayton was a pragmatist who understood that sometimes you've got to do things for the best interests of your country. So he's not one of them. The DA is so obsessed with globalism and so contaminated by Trump derangement syndrome that they have no idea what happened in that meeting. None.
To that point, by the way, Trump could very easily have brought out Steenhuisen's old tweets
Yes.
where he was disparaging Trump.
Yes. Sure. Of course he could have. And I can tell you he knew about them because Stephen Miller would have been the person who made that video happen. And Stephen Miller has all of that stuff. And you know, the thing is that the ANC isn't pragmatic because the ANC is mired in the Soviet era ideology. And so much as I want our politicians to come back and go, listen, guys, we'll have to find a way. We'll call in Adrian Basson and all our journalist friends, and we'll find a way to spin it. Okay? We'll find a way to spin it. We're going to implement a new policy called, I don't know, who knows with what words. The left loves picking words. So maybe it'll be the rainbow and unicorn economic policy. Okay? And the rainbow and unicorn economic policy will promise prosperity to everyone, but it will replace BE. And we can spin it in the media and tell everyone, and we can make all parties happy. But at the end of the day, BE will disappear. Okay? I just don't see them doing it.
No.
And
of course, the main reason why they can't get away with doing that is because of the fact that Ramaphosa has his own party kind of nipping at his heels.
That's right.
And he's got no way of actually selling it to them because he's incapable.
No way of selling it to them, and they're also not smart enough to see the wood for the trees. So you've got the ANC who's mired in ideology, the DA mired in TDS, Gate and McKenzie basically just loving being in government. The Freedom Front Plus needing a marketing and PR agency more than any human on earth has ever needed a marketing and PR agency. And Meghan Markle exists. So that's saying something. Who else, really? I mean, the EFF and the MK, who obviously are going to go their own way. The MK, an unknown quantity, frankly. And the EFF, obviously, just a radical left party who clearly would, after this, not react well to any of the stuff the Americans said because Julius Malema is now famous for all the wrong reasons. And I think what's likely to happen is the Americans will be ignored. I think the South Africans will not do what the Americans want, not enough of it. And that means at some point Trump is going to put down the hammer. And I think this is shown today, in fact, by what has just happened to Harvard. So I don't know if you've seen.
Yes, basically he said that Harvard is not allowed to take any foreign students whatsoever.
Okay. How catastrophic is that for an Ivy League university, Kanthan?
Because their smartest students come from India and China and Russia.
And not only that, a large portion of funding comes off those students because foreign students pay multiples more than local students and don't get given bursaries as much and stuff like that. So what's happened is Kristi Noem, after warning Harvard repeatedly to crack down on the cozy relationship they have with the Chinese Communist Party, to crack down on anti-Semitism on campus, and to crack down on the DEI nonsense, Harvard refused. And so Trump's turned around and gone, no more international students for you. And he can do that because they approve the visas. And if he's going to do that to Harvard, you best believe when we don't listen to him, he's going to do that to us. And so Julius Malema must enjoy his last few trips overseas because when the hammer comes down...
How often does he go overseas, by the way?
I have to be honest, I don't know. I try not to follow the guy at all. I told the media many years ago not to make him a thing.
Every day he's looking more and more emaciated.
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't look like a particularly well man, but obviously he's got to keep the grift going. But the point is that I worry that we will not respond appropriately. And again, it's not hard to respond appropriately.
But are you really worried, or is that your speculation? Because, I have no worries about what's going on here right now. The interesting scenario that we've got is that, we have a failed state, but because we have a failed state, we're actually a lot freer, right?
Yeah, I think that's somewhat true. I think that's true in areas. I think that's true in certain areas and in certain parts of things. And yes, because we have a failed state, because we have the level of corruption we do, you can get away with most things. You can live your life the way you want to. The problem we have is that we require an economy to exist and to live the lives we live and that we want to live. And there are major problems here, and things could be a lot better. And the rand dollar, as you pointed out earlier, at 12 was much better than 18, and at 6 was much better than 12 for many reasons. And when we had a industry that was pumping, with mining or be it refineries or whatever it was, the country was better off. And I would like us to move towards something that looks like that. And moving in the opposite direction, which is where we're moving. And I think American sanctions, for example, and America kicking us out of AGOA, and America basically saying, that's it, we're done with you until you're willing to kind of make amends, I think that will send us in the direction we're going a lot quicker. And so, yes, I am genuinely worried about that.
So remember that we're currently hosting the G20 later this year. Remember that we don't belong in the G20 anymore.
Yes, we don't.
So at the point at which we were part of the G20, we were one of the 20 strongest economies in the world, which is the reason why we were included in it.
Correct.
And we've fallen off that list quite a while ago. And we are only in the G20 by grace of the Americans.
Yes.
And
because they choose us as the African representation, essentially.
for now, yes. But consider this, that Nigeria, for example, is posting 7% economic growth this year, even though Nigeria is such an absolute basket case. You look at all of the other big economies of this continent, and even the smaller economies of this continent, they're all systematically outpacing us. We're actually at the bottom of the pile. And remember that economic growth gets compounded. Okay, so if you're sitting on 100% this year, you grow by 7%, and then the following year, you're adding an additional 7% to your existing growth, as well as the growth on the 7% that you've already grown. Yes.
Before.
So it's compounding.
Yes.
And here we are sitting below 1% in terms of our growth. And so the gap in terms of the smaller economies and us is closing rapidly.
And exactly the point I was making about our potential and the way we could grow and the GDP we could have. And yes, we're hosting the G20, and it could be our last time hosting or being part of the G20.
Yes.
Is that something you see happening?
It all depends on how far Cyril is prepared to go in the next short while. Because the flip side of this, remember that there's a significant chunk of the ANC that is pushing the line that BRICS is the alternative.
It isn't, but yeah.
No, but my point is that under Joe Biden, BRICS would have been an alternative. Under Trump, that's not going to be the case. Because now Trump, and I've been banging on this particular drum for a while, the conflict with China is settled. Okay, so they're now singing from the same hymn sheet. There's the 30% tariffs that are now in place in terms of China.
Yeah, well, there's a 90-day window. They're going to come to some agreement.
For sure. But my point is that for all intents and purposes, it's settled. Trump's got a good relationship going with Brazil. He's got a fantastic relationship going with Modi in India. And he had a 2-hour conversation with Putin a couple of days ago, where they were talking about a whole range of things.
And let's be clear, the minute that the ink is drying on that peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia, and they both withdraw to wherever they're going to withdraw to and put down arms, the minute that happens, let me make it very clear, you will see Russia being reaccepted into the international community at a rapid pace.
Yes.
And within 2 years, you're going to see Putin standing on a stage with all those world leaders who called him Hitler 2.0 shaking their hand.
Sure. And remember, Trump has already said in the past couple of days, he said when he was talking about his conversation with Putin, he says, look, I get on well with the guy. He used to be with us in the G8, and then they turned out and made it the G7. It was a bad thing to do. They never should have done it. And he's very clear that what he wants to do is to reduce his dependence on Chinese minerals by forging that relationship with the Russians, which the Russians are very happy to do. Because, yes, the Russians have the strategic alliance with China, but it does not extend to trade, because the Russians certainly say nothing about the fact that China continues to trade with the United States, and the Chinese would certainly not say anything about the Russians doing exactly the same thing. So South Africa doesn't fit into BRICS either. And that's the point that we need to be looking at, because there is no home left. So if we don't actually make this work...
We're also deeply unimpressive in that group of countries. The reality is that Russia is certainly not the economic powerhouse they once were, but they are a military powerhouse, right? And they're a geostrategic powerhouse. They matter in terms of where they are in the world, the size of their country, the regions, the distribution, what they mean to Europe, the gas, etc. India matters. It's going to be the biggest economy in the world. It's the fastest growing developing nation. It's a manufacturing hub. It's an place of high intelligence. It's exporting skill and knowledge. China is what China is. It's a massive economy. It's modernized. It's a manufacturing hub for the entire world. Even Brazil. Brazil is like the red-headed stepchild in BRICS, because we can't even be considered a red-headed stepchild. We're not even in the family. We're a spermatozoa in this group of countries. Brazil is even moving more in the right direction, and they have 3 times our population, or not quite, but they're close.
I'm sorry, I'm not picturing a spermatozoa with Ramaphosa's face, and I cannot get this out of my head. Damn it, John!
What have you done? We've got the
what have you done?
We have the clip art or whatever it is for the podcast sorted out. But the reality is that we just aren't a player. We could be a player. We could. If we chose...
Most of the guys say, I could have been a contender.
Yeah. Uh-huh. But that's exactly the situation. And so in those countries, taking America out of it and all these relationships and issues between America and those countries in and of themselves are impressive. We're not. We could be, but we choose not to be. We were once. We deindustrialized, degrowthed our entire country, basically, and are heading for squalor by choice, and that is just the reality of BRICS.
We degrowthed and deindustrialized in the name of transformation.
Yes.
Okay. Stomp on that word whenever you see it. It means theft.
It means theft and communism. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Anthony, is there anything else we need to that needs to be said?
I think that Russia is now establishing bulkheads in breachheads in 3 regions. So there's Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv. Chernihiv is a couple hundred k's away from Kiev. But essentially what they're doing is they're carving out a demilitarized zone in Ukrainian territory in anticipation of a peace agreement being carved out. And the longer that the coalition of the willing from Europe keeps telling Zelensky to dig in his heels, the more territory Russia ends up taking. And remember, every bit of territory that they take as part of this process will not be given back.
So eventually, if they carry on for long enough, Ukraine can be as big as Monaco.
Correct.
Good luck. Okay. I think maybe an apology because we didn't record for a 1 week extra. So apologies to the audience.
But as usual, we managed to get on top of stuff, don't we?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, we'll have to just give refunds to everyone, for being a bit late on this one.
Yeah, well, just get them to hit that subscribe button, do the bell notification. What are all those things we're supposed to be telling them?
I don't know. We're very bad at this marketing thing. But yes, like, subscribe, tell your friends, leave a comment.
Or take clips of this and put them up on TikTok and elicit outrage.
There you go. Mm-hmm. There you go. Thank you for listening or watching, as always. And we will catch you next time, which will hopefully be a bit sooner.
2 weeks.
Thanks so much. Cheers.